To neutralize a perceived threat, corrupt authorities often rely on a strategy of total isolation. They utilize dungeons, labor camps, or exile to strip a person of their influence, their identity, and their connection to the world. But as this diagram suggests, that strategy has a functional limit. When you strip away every tie to family, property, and dignity, you also remove the societal weights that govern human behavior. If a person has nothing remaining to lose, they have no remaining reason to follow the rules of that society. We see this tipping point in the story of Pierre Picard, a 19th-century shoemaker locked away in the isolated Fenestrelle fortress for a crime he didn't commit. We see it again with François Lolané, who only survived a Spanish massacre by hiding under the butchered corpses of his friends. It happened to Ned Kelly, who watched colonial police drag his father to a labor camp over a single stolen calf. And to Sunjata, a disabled boy forced to eat off the ground while a tyrant usurped his kingdom and mocked his family. By removing every possible consequence for these individuals, their oppressors inadvertently deleted the boundaries that kept them in check. They were no longer subjects to be managed. They were unpredictable threats to the very systems that tried to discard them. In Pathé, the motivation is deeply personal. When a betrayal comes from friends or lovers, an outcast's focus often narrows into a singular, clinical drive toward dismantling the lives of those who wronged them. This map of 1812 France highlights the extreme tension of the Napoleonic Wars. Because the nation was at war with Britain, being accused of espionage was a lethal charge. Knowing this, Pierre Picard's 3 best friends falsely reported him as a British spy on the eve of his wedding, simply because they were jealous of his success. Picard spent 7 years in a dungeon, where the conditions were so harsh he became unrecognizable. During his imprisonment, he befriended an elderly priest who left him a map to a hidden fortune. When he was finally set free, he claimed the treasure and returned to Paris under a false identity, taking a job as a waiter in the very café owned by his former friends. Picard then used his wealth to systematically ruin his betrayers. One was poisoned, another was framed for robbery and sentenced to 20 years. The ringleader watched his daughter die and his business burn to the ground before Picard revealed his true identity, plunging a final dagger engraved with the number 3 into his heart. François Lolané followed a similar path of annihilation. After escaping plantation slavery, he found a family among the Caribbean buccaneers. When Spanish soldiers ambushed his crew and left no survivors, François only escaped by smearing himself in the blood of his comrades. When he emerged from that pile of bodies, he dedicated his life to a campaign of total retaliation. This map illustrates the reach of the terror he unleashed across Cuba and Hispaniola. François became infamous for his treatment of Spanish prisoners, utilizing methods like tightening ropes around a victim's head until their eyes were forced from their sockets. When the governor of Cuba sent 90 soldiers to capture him, François ambushed the ship and took the crew prisoner. He lined them up on deck and personally beheaded 89 of the 90 men. He spared a single survivor solely to deliver a message. He intended to do the same to the governor himself. For Picard and Lolané, the absolute loss of their previous lives left them with a singular, violent purpose that terrorized the societies that had discarded them. But there is a second outcome to this paradox. When the oppression is systemic, carried out by the state or the ruling class, outcasts often respond by building protections for others who have been pushed to the margins. In 1870s Australia, Ned Kelly was surrounded by this, a heavily regimented colonial police force. Because his father was an ex-convict, the authorities targeted the Kellys for years, eventually arresting Ned's mother on a fabricated charge and sentencing her to 3 years of hard labor. Kelly responded by declaring war on the colonial government. While his gang robbed banks and fought police, they also became heroes to the local poor. During their raids, Kelly would force bank managers to hand over the mortgage documents of local farmers, burning the papers to legally erase the debts of the impoverished community. During his final stand at the Glenrowan Inn, Kelly appeared in this, a suit of armor hammered out of 100-pound steel plowshares. It was a physical manifestation of his defiance, designed to repel the bullets of a system he no longer recognized as legitimate. This same drive to build something out of nothing appears in 13th century West Africa. Sunjata was a disabled child who could not walk, making him the target of constant mockery from the royal court. When his father died, the boy was cast aside entirely as a tyrant took control of the land. After years of being forced to crawl in the dirt, Sunjata asked a blacksmith for a heavy iron rod. In front of a crowd of his detractors, he used the rod to pull his body upward. The iron rod bent under the sheer force of his effort, but Sunjata finally stood on his own feet for the first time. Sunjata eventually returned from exile with a massive army, defeated the tyrant, and established the Mali Empire. This kingdom, represented by the scale of its architecture and legendary gold mines, became one of the wealthiest and most stable empires in the history of the world. Kelly and Sunjata demonstrate that when a person is deprived of every conventional path, they often possess the clarity of mind to forge entirely new ones, whether through iron armor or golden empires. The legacies of these four outcasts vary wildly. They range from West African kings and legendary outlaws to the architects of calculated revenge. The impact of their actions far outlived the people who originally tried to break them. For instance, Pierre Picot's relentless pursuit of his betrayers was so specific and effective that it served as the primary inspiration for Alexandre Dumas when he wrote The Count of Monte Cristo. Order is maintained because people have something to lose. Family, safety, and property are the tethers that keep an individual invested in the social contract and responsive to authority. Treating the vulnerable as disposable is a catastrophic miscalculation. Once those tethers are cut, the pursuit of justice becomes a priority that no amount of further authority can contain.